morning and welcome back to the lecture series on refugee migration diaspora. So, we will be discussing internal migration in South Asia through our case study of Regina Marandi's novel Becoming Me. So, we will be illustrating and exploring, reading the connotations, the implications associated with internal migration as understood through this novel Becoming Me. So, we will unpack the implications, the suggestions associated with internal migration through our reading, through our understanding of Marandi's novel Becoming Me. Migration is an experience that has affected every strata of society, right from the top to the bottom. So, people from economically and socially privileged positions migrate, and so do people from impoverished sections of society, and they have very different experiences, very different realities to share. The tribal populace, who are one of the most underrepresented and underprivileged social groups, have also experienced the blows, the repercussions of migration. They have seen the most horrifying effects of migration, especially during the colonial times and even beyond that. And so, even after the colonial era, the tribals see both types of migration. At one level, it is the internal migration within the nation state, and then the international migration. So, when we talk of international migration, we are thinking of the Girmitya laborers. And when we talk of internal migration in the context of India, we are talking mainly about the tea plantation workers. So, both the indentured labor forms share similarities, which include exploitation by middlemen, conditions of ill health, imbalanced demography, native non native conflict and tension, as well as unfulfilled promises and the harsh conditions associated with displacement and the concomitant cultural alienation. So, both the Girmitya laborers and the tea plantation workers have their experiences have caused some major psychological and physical losses, some irreversible losses that still torment the descendants of these workers, right? Some impairment, some damages have been so permanently done to this section of laborer community that their descendants still face the aftermath of those damages, of those losses. So, apart from having many similarities, there are quite a few differences in the two kinds of indentured labor migrations. On the one hand, we have the internal migrants, and on the other, we have the international migrants. So, there are differences between them pertaining to geographical displacement, as the international Girmitya laborers travel across the continent, whereas the internal laborers travel within the same nation. Then, for the international migrant laborers, the targeted labor population comprises mainly heterogeneous groups from the northern part of India, whereas for the internal migrants, it is mainly the tribal population that work as tea garden laborers. And they are recruited mainly from the Chota Nagpur division and the Santal Parganas. So, internal laborers we see comprise mainly and mostly a large section of tribal groups coming from the Chota Nagpur and the Santal belts, right? Whereas the Girmitya laborers are coming from different parts of northern India. Both types of indentured laborers have been historically associated with certain derogatory, pejorative terms such as Jahaji and Bagania. While Jahaji is a term associated with the Girmitya laborers, Bagania is attributed to the tribals who work in the tea plantations. Another major difference between both kinds of migration is literary narratives and artworks that are available about them. We find a corpus of works on the struggles and trauma of the indentured laborers that are coming mainly from their descendants, which include popular authors such as V.S. Naipaul and Samuel Selwyn. So the Girmitia population, their experiences, their traumas have been recorded, amply by their descendants. On the other hand, when compared to the Girmitia narratives, when compared to the indentured laborers narratives, there is a scarcity of literary narratives by the tea plantation workers and their descendants. And this is due to poor education facility available to the tribal migrant workers. However, authors like Mulkraj Anand have attempted to depict the life and struggle of these tribal migrant people living on the margins of the host land of the host society. And their experiences are mainly recorded in Anand's two major works. One is Coolie, which came out in 1936, and the other work, Two Leaves and a Bud, which came out in 1937. Both of these works actually record the struggles of the tribal laborers. The title of the work, Coolie, refers to the colonial baggage of the pejorative term that is given to unskilled laborers, and Two Leaves and a Bud. This title highlights the exploitation and slave like isolated lives in tea plantations. The Santals are one of the largest tribes in India who primarily live in the Jharkhand state. They have a vibrant culture, including their festivals, rituals, and cultural beliefs, with a rich history that also involves resistance against colonial rule. The tribals have a long history of migration related to shifting cultivation and regional migration. However, during the colonial rule, it took a political and economic turn when the Britishers forced some of the tribal population from Santal Parganas and Chota Nagpur division to migrate, and made them victims of colonial policies of land alienation and labor recruitment. These tribals were basically deluded and deceived into working in the tea plantations, and they were also forced to work in mines and factories. When capitalist colonials developed plantations in Assam and Bengal, more than 10% of the state's tribal population migrated to other regions. So here we have two very remarkable and very detailed sculptures by Ram Kinkar Bej, who shows two themes through these two sculptures. One is the Santal family, right? The other is the call of the mill. So the first one depicts the migration of a Santal family with their little possession that they have, and they are being accompanied by a dog. The picture on the left side, we see there is this entire family moving with the little belonging they have, and they're accompanied by their dog that follows them. So the pain of being uprooted against their consent or their will has been kind of recorded through this sculpture. And then we have this call of the mill, the Santhal factory workers' response to the siren of a factory. The moment the siren is actually blown, the workers are running to the factory. And that kind of a confusion, that kind of a chaos, even the fear, the terrified, emotions are recorded through the second sculpture on the right side. Both these sculptures actually show what the Santals, the tribals, have undergone. If we look back into their history, we would see what they have experienced, the harshness that they have, the harsh experiences that they have undergone. So both these sculptures actually attest to the harsh conditions, struggles, the violence that the tribals have undergone down the decades, across the centuries, right? So when these tribals were moved to work in tea plantations in Assam, starting in 1841, they were tagged with pejorative and discriminatory terms such as the tea tribes and Bagania. Just like Jahajia is a negative term associated with the Girmitia laborers, Bagania or tea tribes is a discriminatory term for the tribals. Colonial planters exploited these tribals economically as well as physically, sometimes resulting in the killing of the tribals. As these plantations are secluded places, most of the incidents of exploitation would not even come out in the public. One of the most notorious incidents of colonial exploitation and homicide occurred in the Kharial tea estate of Kachar region in the year 1921 when a tea laborer was killed by a European planter because he refused to provide his daughter as a mistress, as a concubine to the colonial planter, the British man, for one night. He refused to send his daughter, and as a result, he got killed by the planter. Although the colonials left after the independence of India, the practice of exploiting and discriminating against the tribals still prevails. They are one of the most backward communities in Assam. So, the tea tribe, the small tea tribe that we still have living in the northeastern states, especially in Assam, are still one of the most backward communities, and they have been neglected historically by the government, the local government. They also lack the status of ST or scheduled tribes in that state of Assam, and thus they are excluded from any privileges, any government schemes and programs for the welfare and upliftment of the scheduled tribes. The Santals prefer to call themselves as Adivasi, and they have made attempts to raise their voices to secure the status of ST in the northeastern states. And this raising of voice, this protest has often led to ethnic clashes between the Santals and other tribal organizations of Assam, especially the Bodos. So, the Bodo Santal conflict in Assam is something which traces back into history, which is quite well known, where the Santal tea tribes actually fight for their inclusion within the ST upliftment plans and programs and schemes. So, due to lack of representation in the socio-economic and political space, the Santal community is not able to put forward its issues in Assam. The young generation of these tea plantation workers is educated and they are working as professionals in different fields, but still there is a scarcity of agential role when it is compared to other tribes in Assam. Against this backdrop, let's now try to understand Regina Marandi's novel Becoming Me. So, although there are some tribal poets and writers who write in vernacular languages, in the tribal languages, these writings are read mainly within the community because not many people are aware of, are familiar with the Santali language or other tribal languages. So, there are hardly many authors from within the community who are writing in the English language. So, Regina Marandi is one of the very few tribal authors who writes in English. So, her readership is much more expanded. So, Becoming Me, which came out in 2014, is written by Regina Marandi, and it can be read as a testimonial where the narrated protagonist becomes the mouthpiece of a collective people and attests to their misery, poverty, and their state of dilemma. It is a fictional work and it can be seen as a novel. It is purportedly a novel which is deeply inspired by and invested into the real experiences of the Santali population belonging to the Northeast, living in the Northeast. This work is narrated from the perspective of an educated female protagonist called Leah. Her name is Leah, and she comes from a Christian Santali family living in Assam. The story begins with pristine memories of Leah visiting her grandfather's place in the countryside and engaging in ordinary joyful activities that are akin to village life. And this first episode is therefore interspersed with the Santali creation myth of the universe, which is told by her wizened, aged grandfather. So it's a very peaceful, tranquil background against which the introductory chapter is built and narrated. Soon after, however, and henceforth throughout the narrative, the literary device of repetition is constantly available to the reader. And this entire motif of a sea of gloomy faces of homeless people keep recurring throughout the text. The rejected, unprotected Adivasi people of Assam keeps haunting the narrative, and it profoundly shapes Leah's rite of passage. So through this narrative we also see the girl transforming into a woman, and in the end, towards the end of the narrative, she gets married, right? So this haunting experience, this haunting memory actually shapes her rite of passage, her transformation from a girl to a full-fledged woman. From the creation story of the Santal, the narrative drastically shifts, therefore, to the experiences of trauma and post trauma and the loss of the sense of self, with a beaconing consciousness, with a very strong consciousness that this protagonist Leah has to dedicate her life towards serving the grassroots population coming from her own community. So the grassroots Santal people are suffering in Assam, and she has this calling, she has this beaconing consciousness to serve them, to help them. The prejudices and perceptions of the Assamese society towards the tea labor community reverberate the colonial influence due to the plantation management's active role in preventing the interaction of tea laborers with the local population. So we see that the local population and the tea laborers have been segregated through an active role played by the plantation management, which has resulted in a very minimal interaction between the two communities. So it can still be observed that for an average Assamese, the community of tea garden workers that they call as Bagania has remained very much of the other to the mainstream population. Not until very recently, the perception of the Assamese populace towards the tea plantation workers was very similar to that of the colonial planters. Their contribution towards the economy and culture of the state of Assam has remained largely neglected and unnoticed. So, the mainstream Assamese population is yet to recognize how these tea plantation workers, these Santals, have contributed to the economy and to the society of Assam. Their marginalized position in the socio-economic, socio-political scenario of Assam is one of the main reasons behind the deplorable conditions that they still live in. So, the tea plantation workers' conditions of living have not developed much. Critics such as Fulmoni Das and Robin Hazarika note the following. I quote Das and Hazarika here. Land occupies a significant position in the life of the people of the region, particularly its tribal communities. Tribals, being emotionally attached to land for their everyday livelihood sources, feel highly alienated and isolated from the loss of their land, which is primarily due to the encroachment by the non tribals to their land. Unquote. Becoming Me revolves around the peculiar position of this narrator protagonist Leah, whose family has been uprooted from their home in an intertribal conflict between the Bodos and the Santals. And they have been subsequently marked as a Bagania, or the tea garden worker, whereas in reality, in truth, her family does not trace its past as laborers that have worked for the tea industry, right? So this is the kind of stereotype that any Santal, living in Assam carries. They are called as Bagania regardless of whether they have worked in the tea garden or not. Notably, the narrator's position and her eye, her perspective is that of a tribal female who is accounting about her otherness in terms of gender, in terms of ethnicity, as well as in terms of her class and literacy. So she is peculiarly a case of other at all levels. She comes from an affluent background as a as compared to other Santals. Her economic position is not very weak. So she is also seen as an other within her own community where people are mostly impoverished. She is a female, so she is seen as an other within her own family unit, right, where the males get to share their opinions, the males get to take decisions. Basically, it's a patriarchal scenario within the family where she is, when compared to her brother especially, she is an other within the family. And because she's an upper class Santal, coming from a Christian converted background, and also the fact that she's literate, she is an other even within the Santal community. And further, she's a part of a minority tribe in Assam. So the Santals themselves are a minority tribe in Assam. So she is also an other in the larger scheme of things in Assam with respect to the Bodos, with respect to the mainstream Assamese. She's definitely an other. Her otherness at all levels actually shapes her identity. So the narrative becomes this becoming of me, the becoming of Leah happens through pointing out the several layers of liminality and fragmentation that Leah, the narrator protagonist, posits and undergoes. At school, Leah is identified and marked as a Kisku Santal, one of the largest tribes in India, by her political science teacher. While the Santals suffer marginalization, once by the Dikus or the non tribals, and then again by other tribes from the northeast, with a minimal assistance from the government, Leah's jeopardized position is further understood because she is a female member, and that too from a minor tribal group. Her displacement or her marginalization is happening simultaneously owing to several factors. So, here we can bring in standpoint feminism to understand her condition. Someone who is a female, who is a tribal, who is part of a minor tribal group as compared to major tribal groups like the Bodos, and then the fact that she is from an affluent class, a better off class, and the fact that she's educated otherizes her in too many ways. Leah finds it questionable that the Santhal, Munda, Odao, and Khadiya people are collectively classified as tea and ex-tea garden tribes. So, in the local language of the Assamese, they are called the Bagania. As the author explains, there is no such tribe found in Indian history. This new name, as a way of grouping by work skills, has evolved in the later period of the tea industry. Unquote. So, the designation of Bagania upholds the colonial history at the expense of effacing and erasing the pre-colonial reality of the Santhal in the northeast. The Santhal, as the writing argues, as author Regina Marandi argues in this work, have also lived in the northeast since the pre-colonial times, and they did not live in the northeast only in the capacity of tea garden workers. They have lived there otherwise also. They have right to that land of the northeast as much as other tribal groups and other social groups. So the narrative points out how one tribal group is turned against the other by the non-tribals that they call as Dikus. So the Dikus are instrumental in turning one tribal group against the other, and this leads to the escalation of tensions and riots. While Leah experiences a constant sense of loss of identity throughout the narrative, towards the end, at the time when she's getting married, this fragmented identity resurfaces. Decked in her bridal attire, Leah wonders. She's asking this to her husband. Do I look like a Santal or Christian or Indian? And then she asks, can I still be called a Santal? And later, if I go to church following the Ten Commandments, wearing a Santal traditional dress, and introduce myself as Lia Kisku in Santali, what would you identify me as, a Santal or a Christian? So these are very, important, valid, crucial questions that, that points out how an individual's identity churns out at the crossroads of so many different facets of their belonging. So the religious belonging, the cultural belonging, the gendered belonging, all these realities kind of merge, they intersect to shape an individual. And her husband replies to her questions by saying that she looks beautiful in Indian clothes, Christian simplicity, and Santal physical features. You are a Santal if you are using the characteristic features of Santals as language, greetings, food habits, and above all, the Santal surname. Unquote. So, this also is a commentary on whether a Santal is a diluted self just because she has converted. And the response from the author is that as long as someone is maintaining the community's food habits, greetings, language, and also the surname, the family surname, so diluted, they are still not so displaced from their original identity. It's just that the identity has acquired more complexity, more layers to it, right? The narrative of Leah's becoming, therefore, happens through piecing together the different shards, the different facets of her identity, which emerge at the crossroads of her community, femininity, beliefs, habits, and pedigree. To conclude, this narrative, Becoming Me, helps the reader to understand the issues related to internal migration in general and the problems of the Adivasis in Assam in particular. They continuously and till date they face hostile attitudes and attacks from other local tribes as well as from the non-tribals. In a political turn of events, Jharkhand's Chief Minister Hemant Soren has written to his counterpart in Assam addressing the problems of the Adivasis of Assam and their demand to extend the scheduled tribe status to them and thereby enjoy the benefits that these policies, these development plans entail. With some recent developments, the tea plantation workers have been given some significance in the Assamese culture and literature, but there are still issues that need to be addressed. Narratives such as Becoming Me, a very rare work that we find from within the community and written in English language, it helps us to bring forth different perspectives, different points of view that are associated with the unfair treatment of the displaced tribal communities within India. So, with this, we come to the end of our lecture today. Let's meet with a new topic and another round of discussions in our next lecture. Thank you.